Hello, welcome. My name is Dayana Jiselle with the Fresno Bees Media Lab, Fresnoland, and I want to thank you for joining us for this conversation tonight. Tonight's space is going to be an extension of the many ongoing discussions that have been already happening locally and nationally. That is the relationship between police enforcement and the community. The recent killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and many others before them have sparked a movement. But more than a movement, it's created a new standard for Black and Brown communities. Here in Fresno, we've seen peaceful protests, demonstrations, murals, and people of all ages and backgrounds speaking out, demanding change and accountability from our local police department. Our community continues to mourn the deaths of George, Breonna, Rayshard, and still trying to process local ones like Isaiah Marietta Golding, the 16-year-old boy shot in the back of the head by Fresno police in 2017. We are here tonight to open up the conversation that has been long needed in our community. How can we reimagine public safety in Fresno? What does a public safety reform look like? And will it be enough to prevent future excessive use of force, specifically against Black and Brown communities? This is only the beginning of many conversations on this topic, and we won't be able to get to everyone's questions here tonight, but we hope this is the beginning of many more public dialogues to hear how we can create a new vision for safety that doesn't result in more harm. Before I start, I do want to let our viewers at home know that you can submit your questions in the comment section. Again, we're going to try our very best to get to them towards the end of our conversation. And so now to introduce our panelists tonight, we have Marcel Woodruff, organizer with Faith in the Valley. Faith in the Valley focuses on issues around poverty, environmental justice, and police accountability. We have DJ K. Rich, radio personality, DJ, and community advocate. Dr. Francine Oputa, diversity and inclusion consultant. Oliver Baines, former police officer and council member and head of the new Fresno Police Reform Commission. And Jerry Dyer, former chief of police and Fresno's mayor-elect. I do believe Mr. Dyer was having some technical difficulties, so we are waiting for him to join us in this conversation. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. How you doing?
Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. I have questions directed to specific speakers, so I will go ahead and start with Mr. Oliver Baines tonight. In your time as council member and former police officer, what made it difficult for you to achieve reform in the time that you served for office?
Well, the reform really has to be led by the police department. So council members in our roles, we're very fortunate where we can make policy. But when you're talking about reforming the police department, that effort really has to be led by a willingness from not only the mayoral administration at the time, but also the leadership in the police department. So while council members, we have the ability to offer policy suggestions, the implementation has to come from the departments.
What were some of the things, if any, that you did do during your time as council member?
As a police officer or as a council member?
Council member.
Well, going back, when I first came in, it was difficult because we were in a stage of constriction. When I was in office in 2010, the very first things we were doing were really laying off people in the city. So we really had to really hold the line in law enforcement and everywhere else. Once we came out of recovery, one of the things that I really focused on in my time with my colleagues was really restoring the civilian staff that we lost at the time in the police department. Civilian staff is a critical portion of law enforcement support, and we had lost, at that time, maybe a third of the civilian staff in the police department, if not more. Restoring civilian staff to the police department was a big part of what I wanted to do. Obviously, I ranted and raved about community policing from the dais as much as possible. I was very fortunate at my time as a police officer to actually work in a unit that did community-based policing. But during that time, my main focus was on actually restoring the civilian staff, making sure we held the line with our sworn officers, and making the gains that we could.
Can you tell us what your definition of community policing is? Because we do hear different definitions when the police department describes it to when the community describes it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Community-based policing really is a philosophy. A lot of people, and officers too, will make the mistake that community-based policing is an activity. They will think, people will think, or an officer may think that because they play basketball or because they went to a barbecue or what have you, that they are doing community-based policing. And really, that's not necessarily it. Those are elements of community-based policing, to be sure. But community-based policing is a philosophy that runs through the spine of a department, where everything that department does, from not only all of its sworn staff, but its support staff and every policy, ties into the idea of connecting with the community. And it is put forth in everything that the department does, from the way they evaluate officers to the way they hire officers to the way they promote officers, all up into the interaction with the public, and all of the policing tactics and techniques. So it really is a fully integrated system of being a part of the community.
Do you think it's possible to develop a shared vision between law enforcement and the community, specifically over the role and the size of the police department?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. What we're attempting to do here in Fresno is absolutely possible. The reason we know it's possible is because it's been done in this country already. There are a number of agencies throughout this country and throughout the world that have developed really, really robust community police-based standards. That we know that the evidence proves that community-based policing and the philosophy of community-based policing is the absolute safest for not only police officers, but the community as well. So yeah, I'm very, very hopeful that we can achieve that, because we know that it's possible.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Marcel Woodruff.
How you doing?
Hi, Marcel. How are you?
I'm good.
You've spoken out publicly before, and you say that you're a police abolitionist. What would that look like in Fresno?
Police abolitionist is a framework that says we can imagine a world without police. We can imagine society without police. So in a context like Fresno, what it looks like is a divestment from this historical narrative of pathologizing people, right? Like they throw these stats around saying, this demographic of people commits the most amount of crime, right? And so they police in a way that pathologizes people. What we do as abolitionists say, no, it's the environment. Let's examine the environment and the conditions people live in, and let's divest from police, and let's move into infrastructure, and let's make sure every community has opportunities, resources, and it is equipped to regulate itself, right? And once a community is self-automated, is self-regulated, we don't need police. We have the resources there, and people can operate out of them. So that's what the abolitionist framework and movement is. Like let the communities regulate themselves, and PD can support in the meantime while they're still here. But we want a community in the future with no police.
What do you think is some pushback or some fear when you talk about a community that doesn't have police?
I think the pushback comes from this narrative that so my mom worked for PD for like 20 years, and so I've been around cops often. And there's this narrative that PD go out there every day and they face evil. They put on the badge, they put on the uniform, and they face evil. And they're suppressing this great evil in the world, right? And for people like me who do community-based organizing, who live in the community, who love everybody in the community, I work with gang members and everything, there is no evil. There's woundedness and there's brokenness and there's healing that's needed, but it's not this great rampant evil that they're promoting. And so I think the pushback comes from people absorbing this narrative of, oh my God, they're suppressing this great evil that'll just be unleashed and cause terror in the world. But really, these communities, they need more love, more support, and more resources, and we'll be okay.
What roles do you feel the police department are doing now that could be better handled by like a different structure of workers with different skill sets?
A lot of the work. So like I said, my background is in doing like gang prevention, intervention, and reintegration work. And those of us who are on the ground working with gang members every day or people who potentially might do violent crimes, we have a better lens and a better understanding. Like we know that there's a difference between the kid getting some food right now, for him to go home safely, between him not getting some food and actually robbing a vendor and end up in juvenile hall or county jail. So we understand like the things that cause crime, right? So I think that like in our context, we know that we can deal with our community better. We know we can deal with gang members better and the people who are suffering in our community better than PD can. We just don't have resources. Like for me, I did a lot of my work out of my pocket, right? And so if community members are a resource to engage their loved ones to a greater extent, then transformation happens. And that's not PD's job, right? So that's our job as community members.
Thank you. My next question is for Dr. Francine Oputa. Dr. Francine, how are you?
Hi.
I wanted to
Great. How are you? Good to see you again.
Thank you. Likewise. I wanted to speak to you a little bit about what you feel, what elements of community policing do you think may get some pushback from the public?
Well, I think we're approaching it differently. I think what's important to look at it, community policing has some wonderful elements to it. But if you don't look at what's happening systemically, community policing is like a little Band-Aid on a big gaping wound. You have to look at the fact that in the United States, we are 5% of the world's population, and yet 25% of the world's prison population. That means 1 in every 4 person that is in prison is in the United States. That tells you there's a system problem. So community policing in and of itself is not a bad thing. But if we don't look at the system, what's happening systemic, if we don't look at systemic racism and systemic oppression, Marcel brought up some wonderful points in terms of how are individuals viewed. If someone's skin is seen as a weapon, right, just by the fact of you being Black, you're seen as a weapon, that's a problem that community policing is not going to solve. It's not going to solve. So when it comes to pushback, the pushback is going to be on the systemic issues. Are we dealing with those issues? The reality is, yes, we know that all cops are not bad cops. That's not even the issue. But what are we doing with the ones that are? Are we being honest about that? Are other cops being honest about that? When we saw that, it wasn't just one individual there with George Floyd, but there were others present and involved in that happening. So that's where it's not pushback, it's really just speaking truth to power.
When you talk about the systemic and the roots, in there, do you think about training or the process of how specifically locally we get our police officers?
And here's what's interesting. Police officers know how to diffuse situations. They know how to arrest suspects without killing them. We see it happen over and over. We see an individual go into a peaceful church, murder 9 African Americans, get arrested and driven through Burger King before he gets taken to jail, right? So, and we see video after video of police being hit by white suspect and not shot. So they know how to do this. The question is, why don't they do it when it is someone Black that they are dealing with? And that is racism. And we have to understand that people may not even think they're racist, but if you were raised in the United States of America, that is part and parcel of being a part of this country. And if we don't come to grips with that as a country, then we're not going to resolve this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Oputa. My next question is for DJ K. Rich. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. You've been a big leading role in recent community-led projects. You were a speaker at the downtown protests and are coordinating the Lift Every Voice mural tour currently happening across Fresno. So from your interaction with the community specifically lately, what are you hearing that advocates wish to achieve moving forward in the community in general?
As a whole, change. That's really what it is. Everywhere that I've been, and I do a lot of different events, and everywhere that I've been, it's literally the way that's the current infrastructure is not working. So across the board, everyone is saying change, change, change. So from my work with just the community, it's, you know, I'm here as a as an individual that can help amplify the voice of the community. So that's why I'm here. So the voices that are being raised right now are, hey, we want change. And we've been on the calls with the city council members. We've been in the Zoom meetings and everything, and you just hear public comment nonstop. You have people that want change. And I think that the voices are getting to that point where, change needs to happen. It's justice or else. That's really what's happening right now.
So because you kind of have used your platform to reach out, you've been having communication with some of these leaders in City Hall and doing these events. And what it's sounding like is like they're agreeing with you that change needs to happen. So why do you think that they're agreeing now? Because in history, we're seeing that work wasn't being done. Is it the pressure that was put on, or what this change of mind?
I do believe there's the pressure, but more importantly, I think that the title of the mural tour is the Lift Every Voice mural tour, meaning that we need all voices to be raised in order for change to actually take place. So in the past, as we've seen, there's these different things that are taking place, but you're not getting the full community's support. Something took place in downtown Fresno with 3,500 people showed up, all different colors, all different walks of life. And it really showcased that, hey, this is the community and this is our voice as a whole. So the fact that people have become more organized and we're getting mobilized, I think that right there is showcasing that there's strength in numbers, and the more voices that are being raised, the more that the city council and just people in political office have to listen, because at the end of the day, they're in those positions, they're working for us, right? So therefore, if the voices continue to rise, we're going to have that change.
And you were also very vocal, being part of the peaceful protests. And a few days later, we heard what ended up being a rumor, but the rioting and the looting, and you were publicly open about being against something like that. And then you do have the Fresno community that says, well, we're frustrated. Like, what do you respond to that?
I completely understand. I understand the looting. I understand the rioting. I don't condone it, but I understand it. At the end of the day, if you have individuals that are being oppressed and it's, hey, you're not hearing us. We're saying, hey, there's police brutality, or hey, there's some injustices taking place. There's only so much time as us saying, hey, we're asking for help. We're asking for help. We're asking for help. And it gets to a point, if you're not responding to us asking politely, there's going to be brute strength that's going to be the forefront of an initiative. So yes, I was definitely very vocal on denouncing the rioting, because that one just takes away from the cause, because the message gets diluted. And that's what would have taken place here in Fresno. We had the peaceful protest on that Sunday, and it got rave reviews. And that was a community-led protest by the NAACP at Fresno State. If the rioting took place at River Park, that would have changed the message. And already, even with peaceful protesting, you have individuals out there that are saying, oh, you're not supposed to do, why are they doing this? Why are you blocking traffic? Why are you doing this? There's no blueprint to protest, right? So you have individuals like Colin Kaepernick that are taking a knee. Everyone's saying, oh, you're disrespecting the flag. He came out and said, hey, this has nothing to do with the flag. What I'm bringing awareness to police brutality and the injustices of Black and brown people. So even that was, people were upset with that. And then now when people are protesting peacefully, people are upset with that. So it's really, there's no blueprint to it. But I do know personally, I don't believe in rioting and looting, even though I understand it. I don't believe in it because I think it takes away from the message at hand.
Thank you. Mr. Oliver Baines.
Yes.
What will it take to advance true reform without having the police union drown out what is proposed? You yourself have taken contributions from the FPOA in the past. So do you think that's going to influence your ability to lead in this process?
No, I'm way out of office, so that's not going to have any influence on me. It didn't have any influence on me when I was elected. But I've spoken to members of the police department, to their leadership, the management, and I think that there's more of a willingness to engage in this process than maybe what others think. I'm hopeful. I spoke to, and while I know we were supposed to have Mayor-elect Jerry Dyer on, he and I spoke, and he said to me personally how he supports this process 100%. And I think that that's reflective of what you will see by most of the police officers. Dr. Oputa said something that I want to completely agree with, and that most officers are good officers. And I think that most officers want to have closer and stronger relationships with the community. There are things in policy within the department that don't all the time allow that to happen, but they would much rather be closer to the community than not. The only officers I think that will be worried about reform that may come out of this are bad officers. To be honest with you, I think that by and large, me being a former police officer, I can tell you that there's never a reform that would have made me afraid. I always wanted to have a closer relationship with the community when I was a police officer, and most of the officers that I know are more like me than not. So I think that what we will see, at least I'm hopeful of, what we will see is a number of officers come in and embrace a process where they can be involved, where their voices will be heard along with the community voices, and we get there. So I'm hopeful for the future.
With the reform that was recently announced, what are top priorities that are tangible that you're going to go in for?
You know, I don't want to get ahead of the committee work. You know, I have some thoughts in my head, but it would be disingenuous for me to start speaking about that before the committees has had an opportunity to even convene and discuss some of this stuff. So what I can tell you is this: people that know me and know me well know that I don't do anything half-hearted, and know that I don't do anything for publicity stunts or for show. So what I can tell you is that the work that comes out of this community will be proud of. I think that we have, as I'm seeing the names come across, you know, my desk, at least the recommendations for this committee, these are serious-minded people. And what I suspect is that this community, when this work is done, will be proud of it. It will, and I agree with your other panelists. This is just the first step. You know, moving towards community-based policing, the first step of reform, it is not going to solve every problem. So, you know, we have systemic racism that exists throughout every block of the community. So this won't solve it all, but this work will be something the community is proud of.
So, because we don't have details on like 3 tangible priorities, then what do you feel are maybe some of the biggest issues that are alarming?
Well, I don't want to say that. I mean, listen, I don't want to say that they're alarming, but as far as things that will come out of this, I think that if we do this right, what we will see is a new culture that will be instituted in the Fresno Police Department in the way of its policing practices. And that's big, right? So it's not one thing. So that's what we want. What we want is a different culture of policing, one where the community and the police department feel as though they're connected. You know, there are places in Fresno where that's just not the case. It's not that place. It's not the way. That's not the case in every place in Fresno, but there are places in this community, you know, specifically place, you know, in West Fresno where I live, where there is a gap between the relationship between the community and the police department, places in Southeast Fresno, places in Central Fresno. So the goal will be to change that culture of the interaction between the police department and the community, and bring a bond between between those two. So that's the biggest goal we want to reach out of this, and it's absolutely possible. It's not going to happen overnight. You know, we hope to evaluate our officers differently. For instance, we want to evaluate police officers based off of their relationships with the community, not the number of arrests they may or may not have, right? I mean, we want to create a different police officer. We want to encourage police officers to want to be friends with the neighbors in their communities and the business owners, from a place of a cultural standpoint in the agency, not just on an individual basis by just good officers. We want the culture of the police department to embrace that type of work. So again, these are all, they're tangible. You won't see them immediately because there will have to be a number of reforms put in place to allow that to happen, because you want to make sure that things align. So while we're saying we want this, we also have to make sure that the policies align for officers to be able to interact that way and not be penalized, and to make sure that they're not, putting themselves in situations that are unsafe for them and the community. So obviously we have to make sure that officer safety remains paramount, the safety of the community remains paramount, but that we can achieve all these objectives by smart policy that interact with each other.
Thank you. Marcel.
Yes, ma'am.
Marcel, you're a supporter of the Advanced Peace Program, which was vetoed by the city of Fresno. When we look at data, we see that the program has reduced gun violence in other cities like Richmond, California, and Sacramento. So how does Advanced Peace help advance community safety?
Advanced peace is, unlike PD, it's a preventative tactic. So PD is built to react to situations and try to reduce harm in the front end. Behind it. Advanced peace identifies individuals who may do more damage, and it puts them in intensive fellowships to prevent future harm. So advanced peace, like in this system, it focuses on more preventative measures. And it creates safety because it creates a network of community agents who are engaging individuals and identifying pathways to healthier and more ways to live a level of quality of life that others can also follow. So advanced peace is preventative in nature, which is why it helps community safety.
So what do you say for those that have concerns about the Advanced Peace Program that says we don't want to pay these gang members is really what they're saying?
Yeah, what do we say to that? Essentially, so a fellow in advanced peace is an individual who may or may not be acting in gun violence, and they have not been apprehended by police, right? So it shows a failing in the system already. There's a gap in the system. People are doing things and they haven't been apprehended. What advanced peace does is it supports the system in that way where it gets these individuals and it prevents them from doing further harm. And it's been proven effective with 65% reduction in Richmond, and the program guarantees a 50% reduction in any city that embraces it.
I have a question from a member in the public, Maisi Young. So she says, why do we have to choose between the two? Police to take care of the shooting, domestic violence, et cetera, and community taking care of the community. So I think this is in regards to the police abolitionist, mindset. Why do we have to choose between the two?
Oh, definitely. There's something just popped up in front of my screen.
Oh, there's a question.
All right. That's a question. What's it called? Essentially, like in today's council meeting, you hear a lot about just the origin of policing, right? You hear that policing begins with slave patrols. Sheriff departments begin with as militias to remove indigenous individuals, and then as the system evolves, you get these people who are sanctioned to take people's bodies by the state, right? If they can execute you or they can imprison you, and they have this power. And so you have this system that in its DNA, it's designed to commit violence against people of color. That's just in the DNA. And so we're doing it as much as we can to try to prevent that, try to reform away and so on and so forth, but it's in the DNA, it's inherent in the system, which is why we have to move toward a system that's more preventative because the design of PD from its origin that energy continues to manifest against people of color, and we continue to come back to this place. So we have to imagine something different where community can engage, community can evolve, and community can prevent things and ensure the quality of life for all of its residents.
Thank you, Marcel. I believe we have Mr. Dyer that was able to tune in now. There you are. Hello.
How are you doing?
Technology is great, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry I came on late. I couldn't get on earlier, so sorry.
That's fine. You joined us now. So we're going to have these questions coming at you. We had a question from a member of the public, Dr. Mario Cifuentes. And so he asked, how can we trust that our mayor-elect, former police chief, be objective when it comes to defunding police? Data shows that relocating resources to community policing and other prevention programs work. So will you be following that data?
Well, first off, I think we have to look at what defunding the police means. Every year there's a pie of money in the city of Fresno. The city council and mayor, they make a decision based on city priorities where those funds go. And it is true, obviously, that public safety, police, and fire get the majority of those funds, as is the case in every city. Now, there's a discussion regarding police officers that no longer are responsible for responding to certain types of calls, like dealing with mental health, the homeless, and we want to shift those responsibilities to other entities. You won't get any type of resistance from me at all. I've been arguing for that for many years. The problem is we are the only 24/7 hotline in Fresno, the police department. And so when something occurs in the city, people call 911 because they know they're going to get a police response. And the vast majority of the mental health calls that we get, those individuals are calling out of desperation. Maybe that individual is involved in an act of violence or whatever the case is, and it necessitates the presence of a police officer. Now, I know people would like to see just a mental health worker go out there or behavioral health workers, but they won't. They won't go without a police backup. So when we start talking about defunding the police department, I think we have to have a serious discussion about what do we really want the police department to be engaged in. Quite frankly, I hear people say that police officers shouldn't be involved in social service type activity. Completely agree. But what happens when that social service type activity becomes violent? What happens when simply an out of control youth arms himself? And that's when the police get called in. So this discussion is a lot more complicated than just saying, let's defund the police. Because someone has to respond to those calls. And if a mental health worker says, I'm not responding without the police, then the police are going to be asked to respond to that location.
So talk a little bit about your support with police reform. What is your support going to look like?
Well, I completely support the commission. And I think this is an opportunity for us in policing to look at what do we want our police department to look like, and to allow the community to determine that. And it's very important when I say the community, I mean the people that live in Fresno, who live in the neighborhoods, who can define what they want their police department to look like. And that's the importance of this commission that's being led by former police officer Oliver Baines and former council member Oliver Baines. Because we want to be able to define what do we want our officers doing day to day. And based on that, then we have to say, what are the officers doing today that we no longer want them to do? And then who is going to be responsible for responding to those types of calls? It is very easy to say we're not going to respond or be involved in the homeless. When I say we, the city of Fresno, the police department. The police department is no longer going to be involved in dealing with the homeless. Then who's going to take on that responsibility? We have to define that as a community and make sure that they have the proper resources. I would love to see the police department back away from engagement or involvement with the homeless. Love to see them back away from dealing with mental health calls, because it consumes so much of a police officer's time, and only have police officers focused on those things that are criminal in nature. And if we can get to that point, and I believe that's what we are hopeful that the commission will do, then we can hopefully we can arrive at that conclusion. So when you ask me what I want the commission to do, number one, I want to see them engage the community so we can identify what we want our police department to be responding to, what types of calls, what type of policing model. And what is it going to take in order to fund that type of police department? What type of resources are going to be available to them to do that? There's a number of other things that I believe are important that the commission is going to look at. Our entire hiring process, our recruiting, our training, all of those things are important towards community policing. And so those are the things I believe the commission are going to look at. Very, very comprehensive approach, quite frankly, to policing in general. And I do believe we have an opportunity in Fresno and perhaps across the nation to redefine what a police department does.
So what about choosing our next chief of police? Will the community be a part of that process?
Absolutely. The community should be. Not only that, the community really be at the front end, should identify what they want to see in their next police chief. What are they looking for? What are the attributes, the qualities that are important to the community? As a police chief who has sat in that chair for 18 years, I have a pretty good feel for what qualities are needed to be a good police chief, but I really think it's important for the community to identify what they want in their police chief, what type of leader, along with what type of police department do they want. And I also believe it's important that that we hire an individual, quite frankly, who is able to connect with all segments of the community. But not only that, but that individual has the ability to navigate the political arena, the various labor unions that they will need to work with in the police department. They're also going to have to be able to balance this balance of reducing crime and keeping people safe, while at the same time building trust in the community. And those two things are very, very difficult to balance over the course of time. And I'll tell you why. It's, as a police department, you can reduce crime to a very low level, but it comes at a cost. You're out there making traffic stops, and you're out there in a suppression mode. The more you're involved in those types of enforcement activities, the more likely you are to offend members of the public and lose the community's trust. And so if you back away from those efforts, oftentimes you end up maybe seeing more crime in your city, but you end up increasing the level of trust that a community has. So it's striking that balance, and a police chief has to be able to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Dr. Oputa. Dr. Oputa, what do you think? Well, do you think that these issues and the concerns of the public, do you think it's just a matter of local police targeting Black and Brown communities in Fresno, or are there other issues attached?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by your question.
So
tell me more.
The public has been really engaged right now with this conversation about defunding the police, and their reasoning. They're pulling out statistics and numbers showing that they police targets Black and Brown communities locally in Fresno. So I'm wondering, do you think that that's just a matter of race, of Black and Brown, or are there other issues that add to the problem of police targeting these communities?
Well, I think first of all, and it was something that was said earlier, that I think someone said that these conversations have just started, right? And the work that we see happening now, the work that Dayana and other members of the Fresno State NAACP did, along with folks like DJ Rich, they're building off of work that's been being done for decades, if not centuries. So none of this is new. None of this is new. So I think that's so important to recognize. And I think, again, I can't say it enough, that the bigger issues are we looking at our systems, right? Are we looking at a fact, for example, that 95% of all prosecutors are white? And so if these are folks that, again, see Black bodies as weapons, then what are we looking at in terms of prosecution? Part of the problem is the disparity between sentencing and between arrests, between people of color and people who are white. Those disparities are glaring. And people of color don't commit more crimes, but they're arrested at higher rates, they're convicted at higher rates. You know, DJ Rich brought up the fact that he doesn't agree with the rioting and the violence that has come back on as a result of some of the protests, but he understands them. And I think the other point that people don't understand and don't seem to get, I saw a wonderful post on Instagram where someone said, judging a demonstration by its most violent participants, but not judging a police force by its most violent cops, is the language of the oppressor. So those are the kinds of things that are so frustrating and hurtful for people in the community. The fact that we have law enforcement officers who are doing horrendous things and suffering no consequences. Those are some of the key issues, and it happens over and over and over and over. So these aren't new issues. These aren't new conversations. These aren't new protests. Uh, Folks are protesting in different ways. One of the things that we all know that is new is cell phones. We're able to see some of these things happening, some of these horrendous acts against Black and brown bodies. So those are some of the critical things that the community is concerned about.
We talk about the change, and that's kind of been the theme is the community wants change. Do you think that the community here also has a role, something that the community has to do for this to work out?
I really appreciate you asking that question, because I think one of the things we often hear is people talk about, well, what about Black on Black crime, right? Well, there are people working every day in community organizations addressing gang violence. You heard Brother Marcel just a few moments ago. That's the work he does, coming out of his own pocket, right, to try to affect change with young people in our churches and other religious institutions. That work is being done every day. We're not on the news in front of cameras, bragging about the work that's being done. But every day, people are working against Black on Black crime. And in addition to that, when someone is Black and they commit a crime, they usually get arrested, convicted, and go to jail, right? Not necessarily the same when a crime is committed against folks of Black African heritage by law enforcement. Those are the kinds of things. Absolutely, the community has a responsibility. And DJ Rich and Marcel are prime examples of people meeting that responsibility. And we see it every day. There are unsung heroes in our community every day doing work to keep our community safe. I can even tell you I live in downtown Fresno. I love my neighborhood. And I can even tell you about a time something went down in my neighborhood and I saw some young men coming with a bat, like to attack some other young men. And I said, oh, I don't think so. Not in our neighborhood, go take that somewhere else. So yes, we have a responsibility and we take on that responsibility. I didn't call the Fresno Bee to come and do a story about it, but trust me, this work is being done by diligent people who love their people and love their communities every day.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Oputa. DJ K. Rich.
Yes, what's up?
So you publicly called on the mayor and the city to join the dozen of other cities that have painted the phrase Black Lives Matter out on the street. What has come from that request that you've made?
The request, to just clarify, the request that I made was actually on behalf of the community of Fresno. So that request actually was finally heard on this past Friday, and I got to get on the phone with the city manager, and we actually put together a plan to paint Black Lives Matter in front of City Hall on the street this coming Thursday, June 18th. And it's a significant day because June 19th kicks off Juneteenth. And I wanted to make sure that we do something prior to June 19th to really signify that, the city is turning a new leaf. The different council members that are in agreement, like that's what we need. We need to show and prove. It's not enough just to have a few words that just sound good, right? We actually have to have the action. So on June 18th, this Thursday at 9 a.m., we will be in front of City Hall. And there's also going to be a declaration of an annual proclamation that makes June 18th Black Lives Matter Day for the city of Fresno. And obviously it's not just for that day, but we have to work towards 365 days constantly to say that Black Lives Matter and to make sure that people of color are being heard. So that's taking place on June 18th, this Thursday.
What do you think that means for the city of Fresno to have something like that happen?
The voices that I've been hearing throughout the community as I've been going around is that the main thing is that the city's not hearing us. The city's not hearing us. And I think that this right here is just a step in the right direction. This is an opportunity for the city to go, you know what, we're listening. we're listening, we're hearing you. It's not a victory by any means. It's not a victory. It's a step in the right direction. And I think that in good faith, right, we can hope that the community and the city council and political figures within the Marquette Police Department can come together in a transparent way, because I think that's something big that I've been hearing as well, that there needs to be transparency. So the police reform, transparency, figuring out who's going to be the next police chief, transparency. And I agree that the more transparent we are, that you see what you get. And if it's transparent, now there's an opportunity to educate city of Fresno and the folks that live out here, but on a higher level, there's a trust that can be built because of the transparency. And if the city of Fresno feels like they have their hand inside of these decisions that are being made, then I think that we're going to be off to a better start.
I do have a question from a member of the public. Heather Brown wants to know, what would you like to see come out of the city's commission for a police reform?
What I would like to see come out is more of a community care compared to a quote unquote police reform. I think police reform is needed. I think, like I said, mentioned earlier, certain words cause distractions. So when you hear defund the police, I believe that police officers feel that they're being attacked, right? So I'm about solutions. So, okay, defund police, if that's scary, okay, let's reallocate funds. Okay, so by reallocating funds and putting that towards organizations, community events, because the more opportunities for community events and more opportunities for our public and our kids to get involved, I think that is what's going to make that change. I've said it many a times. I feel like the older generation is kind of like, it is what it is. Some older generations are still fighting the fight, which we appreciate. But the younger generation, we need to nip it in the bud, and we have to put them on a different course. I got with the magical teacher, Miss Carlonda Williams, and we actually created the Kids for Humanity Oath, which is actually an oath that we're encouraging all parents to take with their kids, to take with their children, that pretty much says that they are going to be a person of the community and try to make sure that they're kind, they're courteous, they're safe, and they're practicing good values at an earlier age. So therefore, we can shift the constant loop that is happening with the community.
Thank you, Rich. Mr. Jerry Dyer.
Yes.
I have some questions from the public, and it seems like the ongoing theme here is just how can the public make sure that objectivity is accomplished as you go into your new position? And so how will the community know that it is different when you will be mayor than when you were a police chief? In the past, you made comments, as a police chief, that no one should tell you how to do your job. So the community is concerned, how will you listen and be influenced by the community this time as mayor?
Well, it's tough for me just to say, trust me. But, for 18 years as a police chief, I listened to the community, or I wouldn't have been in that position for 18 years. We were engaged in an enormous amount of community efforts, bringing broken neighborhoods back to life, our police activities league, a number of things that we did with the community. But when I left the police department, I took off the police chief hat. In terms of do I think like a police chief today? Slowly but surely, I'm getting away from that. But I can tell you, after being in the police department for 40 years and being the police chief for 18 years, that is a part of my life. And so I'm always going to be thinking about that. But I also recognize that my responsibility as the mayor of the city is for the entire city, not just in keeping people safe, but every aspect of what city government does. I think I'm in a very unique position in the fact that I have insight into the police department, the system that operates, the funding, where monies are at, and a number of things that's going to be to allow me, as we go through this system of police reform, or what I like to refer to as transforming policing, to have a better insight than perhaps somebody from the outside. I'm 100% confident that we are going to get where we need to be. And if that means us shifting a significant amount of responsibilities away from the police, I will support that. In fact, I can recommend a number of things off the top of my head, what needs to be transferred outside of the police department. And so I think I have a credibility in that respect with folks internally in the department that are going to say, okay, if Jerry Dyer wants to do that, then we trust that it's for the right reason for the police department. And I'm hopeful that in time that people are going to see that I'm no longer the police chief, that I have the good of this community in my heart. And that's really what I want. I want people to see me as a person, not as a police chief.
Another question from the public. It's a two-parted question, but will you support a policing commission that has authority to terminate cops and the ability to remove convicted officers from public pension?
Okay, so let's talk about the first part, what we currently have in place. You know, what people don't realize is that during my time as a police chief, 18 years, I terminated about 100 police officers for wrongdoing. Some of that for excessive force, some of it for other activities. And so we have a system in place that holds officers accountable. We also have an independent police auditor that oversees things in the organization, has access to all of the internal affairs investigations, all the interviews, the video cameras. And so we have that system in place. Now, if we're looking to create a commission like in Los Angeles or perhaps another jurisdiction that has oversight, that's going to be a very, very in-depth conversation. I would have to have a full understanding of what that looks like and what people are talking about, because what I have found is that there's different definitions of what police oversight is. And we have to make sure we're having a good, comprehensive conversation before I would support something like that.
Edgar Estrada asked, how can we trust you after so many years of discriminatory policing practices?
Well, I think that's in the eye of the beholder. I believe if I would have overseen a police department that had discriminatory practices, I wouldn't have been the police chief for 18 years. There's absolutely no way I would have survived 3 mayors and 5 city managers had there been discriminatory practices. And I think what we have to do as a society is filter out what's true and what's not true, what is rhetoric and what is fact. And, I think what's happened in all of these discussions that we've lost sight of the good things that have occurred in the police department. The fact that gang shootings have been reduced by about 50% in the police department, the number of lives that have been saved as a result of that. The activities that we have in the police department that allow our officers to be very engaged in the life of our youth, the mentoring that occurs, the Santa's Village, all of the good things. I'm afraid that all the good things that police officers have done in the city of Fresno have been forgotten. The good works of many of our commanders out there, like Mark Salazar, our captain, was in Southwest and at Southeast in one time. Anthony Martinez, Burke Farah, a number of those captains that have done incredible work in the communities and have people in the community that really support the police. Much of that is being forgotten right now during these discussions. So, when you asked me earlier, what I want to see the commission do, I really like to see the commission look at some of the things that are going on in the police department that are really good and then build upon those. Because right now I'm starting to get the feeling, based on some untruths, that everything that goes on in the Fresno Police Department or any law enforcement agency is bad, that we need to destroy police departments. That's not a good starting point. And I really love what DJ K. Rich just said about, those words, some of those things, it does put law enforcement on the defensive. It will put city government on the defensive, mayors on the defensive. And so we really need to have a good, frank conversation in terms of really what we want in our police department. What do we want it to look like? and to not have these discussions that focus on blame.
And my last question for you is, will you continue to fund the special units as mayor?
Well, I think that's part of the commission's role, right? What do we want our police department to do? And are there certain special units? For example, is the units, detectives that investigate child abuse, sexual assault? Do we want those units to continue to be in existing? They're special units. Do we want our downtown policing unit and the bicycle officers to continue? That's a special unit. And so that's getting the cart before the horse. The first thing we need to do is identify what we want our police department to be involved in, and then build that police department from there. And recognize there are going to be some things we no longer do in the city as a police department, some things that we do. And again, we build our police department around the desires of our community. But someone has to go out there and suppress the gang violence, because, you know, to have 450 to 500 shootings in a city is not acceptable.
Thank you. I want to take this time to see if any of our panelists have questions for another panelist that's with us. This would be the time you can address that panelist with your question. Do we have anyone?
Okay, I'll go ahead and kick it off. I got a message on Instagram because I put the flyer up, and
I really like to say something. I'm glad you were able to make it, Mayor-elect Dyer. I do have to say something you said concerns me to my very core. For you to say that you have an organization as large as the police department and say there have been no discriminatory practices is frightening to me.
I didn't
You
say
know
that.
my husband, one of the sweetest men you could ever know. Let me continue. He and Dr. Bernard Okologu, a pharmacist here in town, were driving in West Fresno in the middle of the day in a very nice car and looking for a place to do our Saturday school where we teach African and African American culture to children. And they were pulled over by a police officer who, when he realized who they were like, sorry, you guys, go on about your day. That was a driving while black episode. And so to say that and we'll have to look at the recording, but my friend, you said something to that effect, that you would not have been in your office as police chief for 18 years if there were not discriminatory practices. If we don't start there, then we'll never make changes that we need to make. If we don't start with saying, and you weren't on when I said most police officers are good police officers. That was one of the things I said, and former council member and former officer Baines acknowledged me saying that. I get that. But if we come in saying that there are no problems, we'll get nowhere.
So Francine, let me just apologize first to you. If I said that, or if it was interpreted as that, that's not what I meant. I think the word that was used was that there was widespread discriminatory practices in the police department. At least that's what I heard. And so I don't believe that to be true. Now, do we have incidents out there in our city where police officers are doing things that they shouldn't be doing? Absolutely. Have we had police officers in the city of Fresno and across the country use excessive force? Yes. Have they stopped somebody without probable cause? Yes. And when we find out who those officers are, then it's incumbent upon us as an agency to discipline. And that's the purpose of having demographic data of traffic stops collected. So I don't want you to ever get the impression that I think that police officers are infallible, because they are. I know, or I wouldn't have fired over 100 police officers, about 100 police officers in my day. So, but when those things come to light, and then we investigate them, then there has to be corrective measures taken against the officers. But my comment specifically, and again, I apologize, was I believe I heard the word widespread. And I just I don't believe it's widespread, but I do believe we have incidents that occur in our department today, yes.
Thank you.
And I would
think
say that you are operating from a place of privilege.
I don't know I know what that
I
means,
know.
but let me just say, I don't know what you want me to say in terms of, other than that we have had officers in our department as well as across the United States that have made traffic stops, that have used force that they shouldn't have used. And when those things come to light, it's important that we take care of them. And that includes up to termination. And so I'm not denying the existence of wrongdoing. I would never do that because we recruit from the human race. But to say it's widespread, I guess that's a different definition. To say it's widespread in the organization, we would have to have a conversation about what that means.
Thank you. I think DJ K. Rich also had a question.
I've heard you.
Yes, I got messaged on Instagram about this, and I actually have a two-part. One's for Mr. Oliver Baines, and then the other one is for Mr. Jerry Dyer. OB, question I got is, how has the latest resurgence or second wave of the Black Lives Matter movement impacted your perspective on policing? Has it changed or has it stayed the same?
No, I mean, it's stayed the same. I can tell you that my perspective is from first a black man that lives in America and has been unfortunately the victim of police harassment for definitely most of my juvenile life and some of my adult life. I can tell you, and I've shared this with some close friends of mine, that this latest incident with George Floyd, it probably broke me in a way that maybe it even took me off guard at how distressed I was to see yet another black man killed, unarmed black man killed by police officers in this country. I am tired. I am sick and tired of it. And it has not changed my perspective, but what it did do is it let me know that the urgency and the time is now. What I can tell you that I'm encouraged about is that what I see happening in this country this time around with this latest Black Lives Matter movement is that I think that the white population is taking a moment and pausing and doing some different reflection that I've seen in the past. I don't know how widespread that is, but I can tell you that my white friends are interacting with me and talking to me differently about what white privilege means, what systemic racism means, understanding how the history of racism of this country has contributed to this moment where we're in now. I've had conversations of that depth with white friends of mine that I've never had in the past. I noticed just what we're doing in Fresno with the courage of the Fresno City Council to call a police reform commission for it to be embraced wholeheartedly through the city, and I believe unanimously by the Fresno City Council. I talked to Mayor-elect Jerry Dyer, his support of this work. So I think the time is now. I think we have an amazing opportunity to make gains in Fresno that probably haven't been made in 40 or 50 years around this conversation of not only just policing, but racial equality as well. So I think we need to seize this moment and not allow this to pass us by.
Thank you.
And I think you wanted me to answer that as well, TJ.
Well, I had a separate question, but you can answer that as well.
First off, let me just say that watching the video of George Floyd was well beyond disturbing for me. It was to a point of shock because I don't believe I've ever seen anything like that. Well, I know I haven't in my entire time in law enforcement. And I believe that's what captured the heart of America, and it should have, for us to do some soul searching. And I can tell you that I've done a lot of soul searching. Oliver and I had a phone call or conversation the other day. I'm not ashamed to say I was in tears when we had the conversation, because I do ask myself, like I'm certain a lot of people are asking themselves around the country, is, you know, the effort or the zeal to keep people safe in a community. Have we gone too far? Have we gone too far in society? Have I gone too far? I mean, we ask that of ourselves. And I can tell you that this time is different in America. It's different in Fresno. I believe with all of my heart that we have an opportunity to seize the moment, to do the things that we want to do as a city, in terms of dealing with the issue of race, systemic racism, to deal with the issues of policing and what we want that interaction of policing to be between our citizens and our police officers. I believe we have that opportunity today. And for me, it's deep in my heart. And in spite of what, you know, maybe it appears I'm trying to be defensive or anything of that nature, I'm not. I really am not. I want us to be better as a city. I want us to be better as a police department, as a profession. And I want relationships between the African American community and police officers to be good. So I think it's not even close in terms of, is it different this time? Oh, it's absolutely different. And so I'm optimistic that there's going to be good things happen. And I'm 100% supportive of this commission and the things that are the good that's going to come from it. And I believe that with all my heart.
And the second, the other follow-up question, what I've been noticing as well, to kind of pick it up after Mr. Oliver Baines, I've had a lot of my white friends reach out too, to be completely honest with you, that never really was able to take off that lens. And now they're actually able to see it. We're having that conversation, that dialogue. And they're asking me, what can they do to help? And one of the first things that came to mind is there's people that say that they are, oh, I'm not racist, right? I'm not racist. But saying you're not racist isn't enough. I believe now there needs to be a declaration of, I am anti-racism. So therefore, it positions you in a position where you're actually fighting the fight to correct the wrongs that are continuing to happen. So real quick, I wanted to share a story. Here in Fresno, California, I do a lot of DJ work. I actually just DJing a wedding. This was a couple years back while I was attending Fresno State. I was suited and booted, wedding attire, finished doing the wedding. And as I was walking out of the apartment complex, there was roughly 5 to 6 police cars that pulled in to the apartment complex. All officers jumped out of the car, pulled their guns on me, their firearms, told me not to move. It was me and a partner of mine, literally standing there. We're frightened. Whoa, what do we know? We literally just got done doing a wedding. We're getting yelled at. We're getting, getting screamed at from different angles, and we're expected to stay calm. And I'm standing there, literally hands up. Police officer comes from behind, kicks me in the back of the knee. I hit the ground, put me down into the ground, starts patting me down, and my hands are on my head, on the ground, face into the dirt for literally 30 to 40 minutes. When we asked what is the reasoning for this, they said, oh, we had a call of a shooting. So I feel that I am lucky. I truly do. I feel that I'm blessed to be alive. And that's happened here to me in Fresno. I was in Chico, California. I got put into a ditch on the side of the road. Got pulled over. My friend was driving, got pulled over. I got put into a ditch on the side of the road. And that was a whole nother that I'm lucky to be alive. So I have a chip on my shoulder on behalf of the people of Fresno community that do feel that there is the oppression is definitely there. So my question to you is, what do you think we need in Fresno to create a city where we do not need as much law enforcement? Law enforcement is needed. I am going to say that. However, what do you think we need to do in Fresno to create a city where we do not need as much law enforcement?
I'll go back to what I said earlier, and I apologize for you being treated that way. Quite frankly, it breaks my heart to know that does happen, and because I know it happens. And that's not to say that police officers don't feel like they're doing their job. But in that case, I don't know the circumstances. I don't know, why they did what they did. But I can tell you, I have been slammed on the hood of a police car by another agency prior to me being a police officer. I know what that feels like. The difference is I didn't attribute it to my, to the color of my skin. But the fact is, you believe in your heart that's what happened to you, and that's the reason for it, and that's all it takes, right? And in and of itself, right there is enough to have a chip on your shoulder, and I don't blame you. So, in terms of what it's going to take, I believe that it's going to require us, all of us, to be able to identify what do we want our police department to do, how do we want our police department to behave, and that's the starting point. And again, I don't have the answers, but I know this community does, and it's important. I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier. I really think it's so important. If we continue to blame each other, we're probably not going to get as far as we could. Is if we can say, let's have a fresh starting point as we go forward. I know that's hard, but I really want us to focus on what can we do to make us better versus going back and finding fault, because that's, I think, is going to keep us from perhaps getting to where we need to go.
Thank you. Thank you, DJ Rich. We have time for one more question. If any panelists have a question for another panelist, Marcel or
Yeah, Mayor Dyer. Before you came on, we were speaking about community agency. Like how can communities be agents of their own change and of their own empowerment, right? And so I guess I'll tell you a story too. So this weekend we did a project in Southwood Fresno. We built a fence with some young people, and that week before, a gang member who I didn't know. I normally work with gang members. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. He came outside and he was just belligerent. He was hostile. Get off my property, and so we ended up having to negotiate, figure out some ways to engage him. We left, we came back, and we learned that young man had been living in a house that has had water for over 2 years. Right? He had the exact right to be mad in life. I understand that. And so earlier you mentioned you gave a gang statistic. We have 500 gang members in the city. We have to suppress them. But what about those of us who are working with them, who understand that their involvement is linked to a desire for identity and equity, and who have the resources to say, you know what, you need water, we're going to help you get it, as opposed to if he came across a cop with that same energy, with that same direction, he probably would have been taken, right? And so how are you envisioning allowing community members such as myself to be more empowered, and Joby Jones and Brian King, everybody to be more empowered to really serve the people that we love without outside these suppressions and these containments?
Yeah, well, Marcel, quite frankly, what you guys do is vital. Extremely important work on the ground. Street Saints, you, Brian King, Joby Jones, what Cornerstone has done in the, with the Hispanic community, Armando and those guys. And that's why we have funded, right, Street Saints for a long time through grant monies to go out there and do street outreach. But you guys, what you do out there is critical. It's foundational. I'll never say, what the police department does is important, but it's not the answer. Because changing people's behavior is the answer. Getting people to drop out of gangs, getting people to, from a faith perspective, to have that spiritual awakening, whatever it is that causes somebody to have a change in their behavior that is sustainable, long lasting. So what you guys do is critical, and I support your efforts. And I believe we need more of it. That's why we created the Mayor's Gang Prevention Initiative. At one time, we had $1 million in the police department that we were funneling out to agencies such as yourself. We have a tattoo removal machine, which I believe we ended up removing tattoos from about 350 individuals this year in the city. Job skills, apprenticeship programs, all of those things are vital, and I support them 100%. But that's, as you know, we're still going to need the presence of law enforcement. Everyone understands that. The question is how much presence and what do we want them doing? But what you guys do, Marcel, I want to applaud you publicly, because what you do is at great risk, right? These individuals coming out there, and you don't know, what position they come from, but you guys are putting your life on the line and every day to do what you do. And I want you to know I thank you and appreciate it. And I want to partner with you in the future to make sure that happens and figure out ways to get you guys funded.
I think I was asking, like, in what ways do you see change the PD's role in changing the environment that they live in, right? So not about the individual pathology, but like the environments that they live in. I said the young man, he didn't have water, right? So how can PD take a stand to really create environmental change?
When you say environmental change, the PD creating environmental change?
Yeah. How can, all right, not that you can change it, but what role can you play with those who are trying to make that environmental change?
Well, number one, we have to be city government, police department has to be supportive of what you do, get you the resources that you need. And I left out Aaron Foster. I know he's out there working every day, and so we have to support you financially, or get funding for you. That's how we funded through a state grant for many, many years. We funded the gang outreach effort. Those monies didn't go into the police department; they went through the police department to organizations such as yourself. And we need to continue to do that and build upon that effort. And I want to do that.
And Marcel, I want to weigh in on this too.
Okay.
Jerry, if you don't mind, because
sure.
it dovetail on the end of our conversation that you and I share with each other. So, Marcel, what I share with Jerry is the problem that people don't understand is public safety doesn't have to do with law enforcement as much as people think it does. It has to do with a person's economic conditions. And we ought to be focused on making sure that these young men and women have places to go to work. We ought to be working on making sure that the economic system in Fresno is fair to all persons. A young man or woman that's been in a gang lifestyle who doesn't have the social skills, we ought to be moving them into the workforce, because the moment you move them into the workforce, they're no longer gang members. You don't need as many police officers. So what I've done, and I shared this with Jerry, I said, Mr. Mayor-elect, I am hopeful that one of the charges that you will do is not necessarily identify public safety with law enforcement, but identify public safety with moving people into the workforce, moving people's economic conditions, and take a focus on that. Ending poverty is what we should be focused on as a way to really deal with public safety. I don't even think that we always immediately think about law enforcement, police. That's not the answer to public safety. The answer to public safety is a healthy economy. And so that's what I challenged Jerry to think through. That's what I spend my time and life focused on is ending poverty, because I happen to know firsthand that a young man or woman that's in a gang, what they want to do is go to work. And what they have not been equipped with sometimes are the skills that you and I may have. And the moment that we can wrap our arms around them, move them, and give them the opportunities and the skills, it changes their life. I watch that happen every day. The program that I started, the Valley Apprenticeship Connections, where we put close to 300 people to work. 80% of those folks were in gangs. So I can tell you that's, to me, that is the answer to public safety. That is how we cut back ultimately on police funding, is when you have a healthy economy.
Oliver, can I just want to add to it, because I don't know that a lot of folks were around when we really had the Mayor's Gang Prevention Initiative that Alan Autry started. And I can tell you that when we identified individuals that had a desire to drop out of the gang, people that were active gang members, we did an assessment to find out what is going to take to allow you to become productive in terms of employment. Is that getting them a driver's license, getting them the job skills? Is it some counseling? Do they have a substance abuse? Making sure all of those things are taken care of for that individual, and then find people who are willing to take a risk to hire. I personally went out to various businesses in Fresno, like electronic recyclers, and asked them specifically. They say, "What can I do to help?" I would tell them, hire a gang member. And I got to tell you, of all the individuals that were hired by these businesses of former gang members. I can tell you not one time did I ever have anybody come back and say that was a mistake. In fact, what they said was those were some of the hardest employees that they had because they were so appreciative to have a job. So believe me, deep in my heart, I believe in that. And we need to do more of that as a city. And eventually, you're right, it will reduce the need for policing services in Fresno. The question is, how do we get there? And we need both for a time, and then eventually, hopefully, the demand for policing will be less.
Thank you, Jerry Dyer. Thank you, Marcel, for the question.
If I may, I'd like to say I really appreciate what Oliver was saying about the economics. It's so critical. It gets back to one of the things that I've been saying about we have to be looking systemically. And when we look systemically, we have to look historically. It is not about casting blame. It is about accountability. And there's a saying that says, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. We've got to look at what's happened historically. And the other thing I'd like to say, Jerry, and I know the work that you've done with our community, but I want you to really think about a mind shift. One of the things I say in my work as a diversity and inclusion consultant is cultural competency is not a destination, it's a journey, and none of us ever arrive. And if any one of us think we've arrived in terms of cultural competency, that's problematic. So one of the things I really want you to hear from me today is when you said you were shocked at what you saw with George Floyd, the Black community was not shocked. We were not shocked. We were dismayed. We were horrified. We were traumatized, but shocked? No. Why? Because we've seen it over and over and over again from law enforcement. So if you come from a place where you're saying, I'm shocked at what I saw, you don't know our story and you don't know our experiences. And I don't want to speak for DJ Rich, but I don't think he has a chip on his shoulder. I think many of our community members are afraid, afraid for their very lives. Not a chip on his shoulder.
Well,
not a chip on his shoulder.
Well,
He's a powerful young man.
I just repeated what he said. DJ.
So, real quick, one question that came in on Instagram underneath the flyer, Mayor-elect Jerry Dyer. If Jerry Dyer believes in community reinvestment, will he surrender his mayoral salary knowing he collects a large pension of taxpayer money? What would you say to anyone who says that?
I would say this, that the decision that I make in terms of what to do with my personal finances, I think is a decision that should be left to me and not dictated by someone else. Having said that, I have a heart for inner city kids, and I am anticipating creating a foundation for inner city kids, and you will be hearing more about that in the future. But it won't be because I'm forced to do something. It's out of the genuine love in my heart that I have for these kids in the inner city. And so, but there will be something along those lines. Just like recently, I was part of an effort to raise almost a $1.1 million for nonprofits, during the COVID-19. I think I have a unique ability through some personal funds, as well as going out and generating monies from folks that I know, to have a foundation that will support inner city kids in Fresno. And I plan on doing that. And so you'll be hearing more about that as my term or my time to take the seat draws near. But I am a firm believer in that. And so we'll be having more conversations in the future regarding that. So, and if I could just, I know we're getting ready to close, but I just want to direct my comments to Francine for a second, if I can. I want you to know something. I have a deep respect for you and for Henry. I've worked with you guys since I was a district commander in Central Fresno when you lived over there in the Jefferson area. I've always...
We still live there.
What's that? And still there. But I
I
want
said,
you
we
to know
still live there.
I have a deep respect for you and all you've done. I love you very much. And if there's something I said today, obviously there was, please know that it wasn't said out of any place other than out of ignorance. And so I'm more than happy I want to learn more from you. I was on the conversation the other day with you and a number of folks, and I think what you said, even though you had to leave the conversation, was perhaps the most meaningful thing that was said on the conversation, and it really helped me to understand something. This isn't about community policing. This isn't about police reform. This isn't about the interaction between an officer and the community. It's deeper than that, and it's deeper in the fact that there's systemic racism. There is something well beyond that we have to address. Community policing is going to be addressing a symptom, but there's something much deeper, and I believe you said that, and I want you to know it resonated with me.
Thank you. Thank
I
you. I know
appreciate that. And I've said the things I said because I felt you could hear them from me, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Francine Oputa. Thank you to all of our speakers tonight. Thank you, Jerry Dyer, Oliver Baines, DJ K. Rich, Marcel Woodruff, and Dr. Francine Oputa for joining us tonight. I know we went a little bit over, but I think that speaks that this is a much needed conversation. Thank you to our viewers. My name is Dayana Jiselle, engagement reporter with Fresnoland. Please support Fresnoland and stay connected by following us all on our social media platforms at Fresnoland. Have a good night.